The Atlantic slave trade, a chapter in human history marked by unparalleled brutality and immense scale, transformed continents, economies, and societies across the globe. It was a forced migration of an estimated 12.5 million Africans across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas, profoundly shaping the modern world. This wasn't just a movement of people. It was a systematic enterprise of human trafficking that lasted for over 400 years, from the 16th to the 19th centuries. To truly grasp its magnitude, we must understand its origins, its mechanisms, and its devastating, enduring legacy. While slavery had existed in various forms across the world for millennia, including in parts of Africa, the Atlantic slave trade was unique in its racialization, its industrial scale, and its connection to the rise of global capitalism. Before the Europeans arrived, African societies practiced diverse forms of servitude. This often involved war captives, debtors, or criminals, and typically did not involve chattel slavery, where people were treated as absolute property with no rights. These pre-existing systems were different in scale and nature from what was to come. The catalyst for the Atlantic slave trade was the European discovery of the Americas in the late 15th century and the subsequent colonization by powers like Portugal, Spain, Britain, France, and the Netherlands. Vast new lands were opened up, ripe for the cultivation of labor-intensive cash crops such as sugar, tobacco, cotton, and later coffee. The indigenous populations, decimated by European diseases and brutal exploitation, proved insufficient as a labor force. Europeans initially attempted to enslave Native Americans, but their populations dwindled rapidly, and many successfully resisted or escaped due to their familiarity with the land. The search for a new, compliant, and plentiful labor source led them to West Africa. Portuguese explorers, having established trading posts along the West African coast in the 15th century, were the first to systematically transport enslaved Africans across the Atlantic. They initially sought gold and spices, but soon realized the immense profit potential in human beings. The first enslaved Africans arrived in the Caribbean in the early 16th century, primarily to work on sugar cane plantations, a crop that would fuel the insatiable demand for labor. European ships laden with manufactured goods, textiles, alcohol, and firearms sailed to West Africa. The demand for sugar in Europe exploded, turning the Caribbean islands and parts of Brazil into vast, brutal factory farms run by enslaved labor. The triangle trade emerged as the dominant economic model. These goods were exchanged for enslaved people, who had often been captured in the interior by African traders or rival states, then marched to coastal fortresses. The second leg of this journey, the infamous Middle Passage, was the transatlantic voyage itself. This was the most horrific part of the trade. Enslaved Africans were packed into the holds of ships, often for journeys lasting weeks or even months, under unimaginably brutal conditions. The stench, the cries, the despair on these ships were beyond comprehension. They were shackled, crammed into spaces too small to stand or even properly lie down, enduring unsanitary conditions, disease, starvation, and constant fear. Mortality rates were staggering, with an estimated 15 to 25% of captives dying during the Middle Passage due to disease, malnutrition, violence, or suicide. Many attempted to resist, leading to brutal suppression. Upon arrival in the Americas, the surviving Africans were paraded, inspected, and then sold at auction to plantation owners, often separated from their families and communities forever. They were dehumanized, branded, and reduced to mere property, their identities stripped away. Life on the plantations was a living hell. Enslaved people were forced to work from dawn till dusk, enduring severe physical punishments, inadequate food, and brutal living conditions. They were denied basic human rights, access to education, and often the right to marry or raise their own children. The system was maintained through extreme violence, intimidation, and psychological torment, designed to break the spirit and prevent rebellion. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, enslaved Africans demonstrated remarkable resilience and resistance. This resistance took many forms: sabotage of tools, feigned illness, slow work, escape forming maroon communities, and outright rebellion. The Haitian Revolution, a successful slave revolt led by Toussaint Louverture against French colonial rule from 1791 to 1804, remains one of the most powerful examples of enslaved people fighting for their freedom. Its success sent shockwaves across the slave-owning world, inspiring hope for the enslaved and fear for their oppressors. The economic impact of the Atlantic slave trade was immense and far-reaching. Millions of the most able-bodied young men and women were forcibly removed, leading to massive demographic decline in some regions. For European powers, it fueled the rise of mercantilism and provided the capital for the Industrial Revolution. The wealth generated from slave-produced goods like sugar and cotton flowed back to Europe, enriching merchants, bankers, and industrialists. It laid the foundation for modern global trade networks, but at an unimaginable human cost. It built the infrastructure, cultivated the cash crops, and generated the wealth that allowed European colonies to flourish. For Africa, the impact was devastating. The trade exacerbated internal conflicts, as some African states and individuals participated in the capture and sale of people, often driven by the desire for European goods and weapons. This created a cycle of violence, instability, and economic underdevelopment that continues to affect the continent today. For the Americas, enslaved labor was the bedrock of colonial economies. The labor of enslaved Africans transformed vast swathes of land into productive agricultural powerhouses, forever shaping the economic and social landscape of the New World. The abolition movement gained momentum in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, driven by a confluence of factors. Enlightenment ideals of liberty and human rights, along with the growing moral and religious opposition, particularly from Quaker communities, began to challenge the legitimacy of slavery. Accounts from former enslaved people, like Olori Equiano's autobiography, provided powerful first-hand testimonies of the horrors of the trade, galvanizing public opinion. In Britain, figures like William Wilberforce tirelessly campaigned in Parliament for the abolition of the slave trade. In 1807, Britain abolished the slave trade, though not slavery itself, followed by the United States in 1808. Full emancipation came later, in the British Empire in 1833, and in the United States with the 13th Amendment after the Civil War in 1865. Brazil, Cuba, and other parts of the Americas continued the trade for decades, with Brazil being the last to abolish slavery in 1888. The legacy of the Atlantic slave trade is deeply embedded in the fabric of modern society. It created enduring systems of racial hierarchy and discrimination that continue to impact black communities around the world. The wealth accumulated through slavery contributed to the vast economic disparities between the global North and South, and between racial groups within nations. The African diaspora, spread across the Americas, has forged vibrant cultures, music, art, and spiritual traditions, demonstrating incredible resilience and creativity in the face of immense adversity. Discussions around reparations for the descendants of enslaved people are ongoing, seeking to address the historical injustices and the enduring economic and social disadvantages caused by this brutal system. The Atlantic slave trade is not merely a historical event. It is a foundational trauma that continues to reverberate through contemporary society, influencing politics, economics, and social relations. Understanding this history is crucial to comprehending the origins of racial inequality, the dynamics of global power, and the ongoing struggle for justice and equity. It reminds us of humanity's capacity for cruelty, but also of the indomitable spirit of those who resisted and survived. By studying this dark chapter, we aim to learn from the past, to confront its present-day consequences, and to work towards a future where such atrocities are never repeated.